All right, so let's talk about free will and determinism. So the whole thing is that we're asking, do you have free will? But it's really important to understand before we can answer this question, we have to define what free will is, and we have to define what you are. A lot of the times people jump into these discussions, especially when it deals with physics, and there's no definition given to what is free will, what is you, and of course, think about it logically, how silly that is to try and answer the question if you have free will without defining free will and you. You really won't even know if you have an answer or not. And another thing that's very interesting about this is that often you'll find physics getting into this discussion. And physics often pokes its nose into places where it doesn't know much about. Free will, consciousness, etc. are topics that are philosophical topics. Most people that are involved in physics tend to be philosophically illiterate. And they are philosophically illiterate, and so they don't understand the concepts of free will and consciousness, etc. For example, when they talk about consciousness, they are actually most often referring to sentience and mind, but they say consciousness, which is very, very sloppy. Consciousness is a different thing entirely. And if you are looking into philosophy or even psychology, you will see that that is the case. So we often see physics poking its nose into places where it doesn't belong because physics is relegated to the domain of matter. Free will, mind, consciousness, this is a different domain, and physics really has no business trying to say anything about it because they don't know anything about it via their own paradigm. So let's really dive into this and explain why that is, what we're talking about, and how it relates, and find out if you have free will at all. So what is free will? So free will is your ability to choose, and this is important, okay? Now, please pay attention. Obviously you are, but specifically pay attention because free will is very nuanced, and many people misunderstand it because they haven't correctly understood its definition or what it actually is. This is going to be really important. I see so many people getting tripped up by the idea of free will because they haven't properly understood what free will is. It's a big stumbling block for many people. So here we go. Free will is your ability to choose one thing over another without external elements choosing for you. It's an internal process. So if you can choose via internal volition, then you have free will. So it's an internal process. So if you can choose through your own internal volition to choose one thing over another via your internality, then you have free will, okay? So that is what free will is. And then what are you? What are you? Now, in Hyperionism, you are a mathematical being. You are an eternal mathematical mind. And this isn't any kind of airy-fairy, woo-woo mystical thing. It is clearly and precisely defined via Fourier mathematics. You are a complete and consistent set of Fourier waveforms stemming from Fourier basis waves. Long story short, you're a mathematical system. So the question is going to be, how does free will exist within a mathematical system? We're going to answer that later. But first, we're just going to look at free will in general, how people define it, or not define it, but how it's put forward in general in philosophy and physics, etc. But we will get to the Hyperion interpretation as well. So we've defined free will, and we've kind of tentatively defined what you are according to Hyperionism. You, according to Hyperionism, are not your body. You are not your brain. You are an eternal monadic mind, a system of waveforms, frequency patterns defined by mathematics. You are a mental mathematical structure. So with that in mind, let's start breaking this down. There are 3 schools of thought with regard to free will within philosophy. There is determinism, also known as hard determinism. There is compatibilism, also known as soft determinism. And then there is indeterminism, also known as libertarianism. Now, do not confuse libertarianism with the political position. They have nothing to do with each other whatsoever. Nothing at all. They just so happen to share the same name. Other than that, they share no commonality. So we have determinism or hard determinism, compatibilism, aka soft determinism, and indeterminism, aka libertarianism. Let's define these. Determinism, aka hard determinism, says that things are predetermined and that you do not have free will, that free will is an illusion. This is the general position taken by physicists and individuals like Sam Harris. This is the general position. So many scientists today will say that you don't have free will, that your decisions, your conscious choices are all an illusion. Everything is predetermined by the physical laws of existence, chemical interactions in the brain. It's all a material process. That's hard determinism, aka just determinism. Then we come to compatibilism, also known as soft determinism, which says that things are predetermined, but you still have free will. So compatibilism says that there is determinism. Determinism is true, but you do have free will. So you contrast that with determinism, which says things are predetermined, but you don't have free will. Compatibilism says things are predetermined, but you do have free will. Now we're going to talk about the Hyperion position. And we're going to see that the Hyperion position is kind of beyond all these ideas, but it fits best within compatibilism. We're going to see why, because that raises the question, how can you live in a deterministic system and also have free will? How is that possible? That probably seems contradictory to you. If things are determined, how can you have free will? How is that possible? We are going to be answering these questions in terms of Hyperionism, which always remember, when we talk about Hyperionism and ontological mathematics and everything that goes along with that, we break paradigms, we break definitions. So we're always kind of beyond these ideas that came prior to Hyperionism, because we break out of these molds, but people like categories. And so if we try and fit it into something, it fits best within compatibilism, but we'll see why. So, and then we have indeterminism, aka libertarianism. Now, indeterminism, aka libertarianism, says that things are not predetermined and you do have free will. We're going to talk a little bit about this later, because there are different forms of indeterminism, and because the definitions are fuzzy, things get a little dicey, but we'll have answers for this. Now, let's take a look at the most popular position, the position taken by most of those who are within mainstream science. Most people, physicists, etc., in mainstream science agree with hard determinism in that things are determined and you do not have free will. Now, quantum mechanics does come into the picture, and we'll talk about that. All right, so that will be something we discuss. But let's hold back on that for a minute and talk about the position of the general position of physics, those that follow hard determinism and say that reality is material. So here's the idea. All of reality, according to a physicalist, materialistic, deterministic view of reality, which is the mainstream position of science, is that all reality is material. And that's it. You are nothing more than the chemical interactions in your brain. You've got the neurotransmitters going on, transmitting the various chemicals, and that's it. Your mind, your subjectivity, the what it is to be you, and your free will is an illusion, according to physics. We've talked about in many videos why this is an extremely ridiculous, fallacious, and inverted position. But let's go with it for a minute to see why you don't have free will according to this position. So the reason that you don't have free will according to this position is because in this idea that reality is matter and only matter, and you are your brain and nothing but your brain and body and nervous system, the universe then is one grand deterministic system. And so what does it mean for something to be deterministic? For something to be deterministic, it essentially means it follows a causal chain. What is a causal chain? If you picture dominoes lined up and you push one domino over, that domino hits the next one, it causes it to fall over, it hits the one after that, which causes the next one to fall over, which hits the next one and causes the subsequent one to fall over, etc. So you can see that dominoes exhibit this causal chain of events. One follows another, follows another, follows another, and each one follows the previous event because the previous event caused the next event. This is a causal chain of events, and you can see, if you look at the dominoes, the dominoes are going to go into a determinate trajectory. As long as you set them up correctly and didn't make a mistake, if you knock the dominoes over, you know exactly how they're going to fall. A domino isn't suddenly going to jump out and do something different. It's a causal chain of events. So, according to hard determinism and materialism and physicalism, reality behaves this way. Now, some of you might be objecting because of quantum mechanics. We will get to that in a moment, but that will be require another section to talk about. Right now, we're just focusing on this. So, if we think of reality and matter being this causal chain, mechanistic system, very much like dominoes falling over, then you do not have free will in this system because there are no free agents. There are no entities that don't exist within this causal framework. So just like dominoes fall over and necessarily and deterministically cause that trajectory, the same thing happens with your brain and the chemicals in your brain. Because scientific materialism says that all reality, all the universe behaves this way. That includes your brain. And because physical materialist hard determinism says that you are your brain, then that means you are subject to the same deterministic laws. So what this means is that you are just like a domino being pushed over by another domino, that you are subject to the laws of nature. So when you make a choice to go to sleep instead of stay up reading, when you make a choice to stay in a relationship rather than breaking up, you may feel like you have that choice, but physical determinism says that choice is an illusion. You are actually forced to make those choices by an external causal chain of events. So this is the important part to understand about that particular position. According to this position, the laws of nature, as in the materialistic external laws, cause you to do everything that you do. You have no internal agency or volition. So this is really important to understand because the differences are going to seem subtle, and I see a lot of people get tripped up on this topic because the differences are very, very subtle. So in this particular definition, you do not have free will because you have no internal agency or volition. In other words, your mental state, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You are going to go to sleep. You are going to end up breaking up regardless. It's set in stone, and not because of your internal agency, but because of external law, because of an external causal system. That's the key thing to take away, the difference between an external causal chain and internal agency. They say you have no internal agency. That is an illusion, that it's all governed by external law, everything. All right, so let's keep that in mind as we continue. Let's take a look at the idea of indeterminism or libertarianism. So the idea of indeterminism or libertarianism says that things are not predetermined. Things do not follow these predetermined causal chains, and you do have free will. Some people use quantum mechanics to argue for this. Now, I'm not going to say that physicists say this. I'm just going to say that some people use quantum mechanics as an idea to argue for free will. Now, there are two extremely huge problems with this position. One is that randomness, because for those who don't know, quantum mechanics says that reality behaves like waveforms rather than like the classical idea of matter. Now, there are different ways to interpret the data of quantum mechanics, the experimental results. There is a particular definition known as the Copenhagen interpretation. And the Copenhagen interpretation is by far the most popular interpretation for quantum mechanics. It is the mainstream view of quantum mechanics. If you ever watched a documentary on quantum mechanics, they are talking about the Copenhagen interpretation. The Copenhagen interpretation is so popular that it is almost used synonymously with quantum mechanics. If you talk about quantum mechanics, usually people will think automatically you're talking about the Copenhagen interpretation because it's that popular. However, the Copenhagen interpretation is extremely fallacious. It's a violation of reason. And even many of the very prominent founders and contributors to quantum mechanics were extremely opposed to this interpretation. The reason why that scientists favor this interpretation is because it is in line with their empirical and materialist beliefs, and they don't want to step outside of their paradigm. In other words, it's dogma. It's brainwashing. They believe that reality is empirical and material. The Copenhagen interpretation can support this, and so they go with that interpretation even though it violates reason. But let's not get too off track. So what does the Copenhagen interpretation say? The Copenhagen interpretation says that reality is actually ultimately founded on randomness and probability. So essentially, this view of reality kind of says that reality doesn't follow dominoes knocking each other over. And remember, I'm summarizing for sake of time and clarity. So instead of it being that reality is like dominoes pushing each other over, it's more like rolling dice. So some people will appeal to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics by saying that reality is inherently random and probabilistic to try and argue for having free will. Now, there are two huge problems with this. The first is that randomness is not free will. So here's the idea. If you want to make a choice, say you want to make a choice between having a sandwich or ice cream. If you want to have sandwich or ice cream, that's a choice that you're faced with. Now, if you're faced with that choice in the deterministic world, the one we just talked about, the domino falling over position, you would, because of external laws and chemicals in the brain, be forced to choose, let's say, the sandwich, though you would have the illusion of choosing that you wanted to choose the sandwich. That would be an illusion. You would actually be forced, not because of your internal volition or internal agency, but because of external factors, material things. Now, but let's look at the other idea. So what if reality is inherently random? Does randomness say free will? Well, think about it. If you have the choice, let's say between the sandwich and the ice cream, if it's random, is that free? How is that free will? It's not free will. Randomness is not free will because you're not choosing one over the other because of your own reasons You're choosing one over the other because of randomness. Randomness does not solve free will. Randomness is actually the opposite of free will. You are unfree in every possible conceivable way if reality were random. Because, you know, imagine, this is kind of silly, but imagine me sort of walking down the street and just like doing like completely random movements. That's an exaggeration of the position, but you can see, you take it to that point. Is that free will? No, it's chaos and the opposite of free will. It's anti-free will. So randomness does not solve the problem of free will. And so we also have to understand as well that in addition to that, true randomness is impossible because it's a violation of the principle of sufficient reason. It's irrational. True randomness does not exist. True randomness is as absurd as appealing to a miracle. Why is that? It's because there's no rational mechanism via which randomness could occur, because randomness is the occurrence of something for no reason, without a mechanism, without a rational mechanism. It's akin to a miracle. A miracle is something that you can say, you know, if someone asks you, oh, how did that happen? It was a miracle. Means, oh, there's no reason. It just did. Miracles are impossible. Randomness is also impossible. Now you might be thinking, well, what do you mean? I roll the dice all the time. It's random. No, that's just the appearance of randomness. When you roll the dice, it's not actually random. It's that the process is so incredibly complex that it seems random. When you roll those dice, it's such a complex process that you have no knowledge of how those dice are going to end up because the process is so complex. So there is a difference between extreme complexity and extreme reliance on initial conditions and randomness. True randomness, I'll say this again, does not exist. And the fact that science tries to appeal to randomness shows their ignorance in philosophy and reason. Because appealing to randomness is the same thing as appealing to God or miracles. They are rationally impossible. So again, if you're rolling dice, if you knew the exact angle that the dice left your hand, if you knew the exact force that you applied, if you knew the exact angle they'd hit the table, if you knew the exact wind pressure, if you knew all the absolute initial conditions of those dice, you would be able to know deterministically what they would land on. It's not random. It's just extreme complexity, extreme reliance on initial conditions. So whenever you see something random, it's not actually random. It's extreme reliance on initial conditions. So what is true randomness? True randomness is something that does not exist. It is impossible. Nothing is truly random. You might be thinking, well, what about the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics? Doesn't that say that reality is random? It's an interpretation, which means you can say whatever you want about it. Doesn't mean it's true. It's just an interpretation of the data. Saying that reality relies on randomness is like saying God created existence. Just because someone says it doesn't mean it's rational, doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean anything else. The empirical data of quantum mechanics does not prove that reality is random. It is just a set of data that shows the behavior of particles, and you can interpret that data as either being random or being governed by something deeper that is deterministic. And in Hyperionism, that something deeper that is deterministic is eternal mathematical minds, internal will. But of course, scientific materialism doesn't like that idea. So what do? They go with the impossible idea. They go with an idea that is anti-rational, that is literally impossible, that is akin to invoking miracles and God, because the actual answer destroys their paradigm. Scientific materialism and physicalism has become a dogmatic belief. It is not rational, it is anti-rational. And you can know that because it's founded now in indeterminism, which is an irrational position. All right. So now let's talk about, so we've talked about determinism. We've talked about indeterminism, aka libertarianism. Now let's talk about compatibilism. Compatibilism is the position that things are deterministic, but you do have free will. Now this is where Hyperionism falls. Again, we kind of shatter definitions, so we don't fit nice and neat into any of these boxes. We're beyond these ideas. But if we are forced to choose one, this would be the most correct one. Now there's more to say about that, but let's first lay out our position, okay? So in Hyperionism, this is a mathematical reality, which is mind. Each and every one of us are not our bodies. We are eternal monadic minds, which means each and every single one of us are individual, unique sets of mathematical laws that are evolving by transforming their internal variations of their mathematical pattern. So they are evolving mathematical systems. We are evolving mathematical systems. Now, it also must be said that this is living mathematics, ontological mathematics. This isn't dead abstract math. This essentially what this means is that reality is living mind. It's living reason, and it's structured according to reason, but there is a content component to it as well, which means that for every let's say frequency, there is a experience also paired with it. So it's living, it's alive, there is experience with it. To put it simply, we can use numbers as an example. So we can use numbers to represent the structure of reason that is existence. And we could imagine that every number, let's say, is paired with a certain experience. So when we experience a number, we are having an experience such as hot, cold, pain, red. Now, it's much more complicated than this, but you get the general idea. It's not dead abstract mathematics. It's living math. And really what it is that we're using numbers and mathematical concepts to reflect this thing that is reality. Because think about it. Reality just is. When I say it just is, I don't mean that there's no reason for it. There absolutely is. When I say it just is, it means it's beyond the words that we apply to it, because language is ultimately just a metaphor. So reality is a structure of reason that has experience paired with it, because it is rationally possible. And so we use mathematics to understand this. But it's very important to understand that this kind of mathematics is living mathematics. Because people always get tripped up on this. They think, oh, it's, are there numbers floating around in some transcendent domain? No. It's that reality is a certain structure that is reason. Mathematics perfectly reflects the formal side of reason, and thus we can use mathematics to 100% accurately represent the formal side of reason. Now, the content is different. The content is the experience paired with, let's say, every mathematical value. Really, it's every frequency, but... Now, the reason why I'm telling you all this, and the reason why it's important, is because if you don't understand what existence is, how can you say if you have free will? If you don't know what you are, how do you know if you have free will? If you don't know what free will is, how do you know you have it or not? If you don't know what existence is, how do you know fucking anything? If you don't know what we are, where we are, why we're here, if you can't answer these basic ontological questions, these first principles of reality, how can you say anything at all? You have to know what existence is to be able to make meaningful statements about it. So to ask the question, do you have free will? We have to know what you are. What are you? You are not your body. You are not the chemicals in your brain. You are an eternal mathematical mind, a mathematical being, a system of waveforms, a system of frequencies. Every single one of us is. And of course, this is not just some kind of assertion. We can show this mathematically. Now, the reason why this is important with regard to free will is because now we're going to show that how determinism and free will is possible. How determinism and free will is possible is because every single eternal mind which is what you are and I am and everyone is, animals as well. Every single entity, every single monadic mind is its own deterministic system. This is important to understand because in the hard determinism view, when we're taking the physicalist materialist view, there's only one deterministic system. That is the external material world that is not you. You are subject to the laws of the external material world. Therefore, you have no free will because you are forced by the external laws of nature to do X rather than Y. Now, in Hyperionism, it is deterministic, but it's not one deterministic system. Every single monadic mind is its own deterministic system that is self-determining. So this is where this is critical. The reason why I'm kind of talking a little slow and taking it step by step so much is because people get really tripped up here because they have the wrong idea of what free will is. So remember, we define free will as having internal agency and internal volition rather than being moved by external law. So, being that you are an eternal mathematical mind, we have various deterministic systems. Now, what about the physical world? Is the physical world a deterministic system? Yes, it is. But it's not the only deterministic system. You have the physical world, which is generated by our collective frequency contributions. This physical world is generated by us. So is the physical world a deterministic system? Well, it follows mathematical laws. Yes, it is. Now, the difference is, though, is that there is a multiplicity of deterministic systems, eternal minds, interacting with each other and the physical world, which is completely different than there being one and only deterministic system, which is the physical world that imposes itself upon you. In fact, you are just an illusion. You don't even exist. This is different. Now, so when you make a choice to do one thing over the other, is it because you are forced to by external law? No. It's because you, as an eternal mathematical mind, have determined yourself by using your rational faculties, your determinative faculties, to choose one thing over the other. Now, are you doing this deterministically? Yes, you are. Does that mean that you are not free? No, it doesn't. Because an external system is not imposing itself upon you. An external system is not forcing you to do one thing or another. An external system is providing you with data for you as an internal mind, a free agent, to be able to use that data to then examine via your rational faculties to decide whether you will or not. Now, whether you will or not, is that determined? Yes, it is. But it's determined by you. See the difference and the reason why people get tripped up here? It is determined, but it's determined by you. Not external physical law, by your own internal volition and agency. So it is determined, but it's determined by you. And is that not the very definition of free will? If it wasn't determined in a deterministic way by you, then the only options are it would be determined by something else, you wouldn't have free will, or it would be random. And as we saw, randomness is not free will. So the fact that something is determined does not mean that you don't have free will. The fact that you determine it is what free will is. And if you get it, that's great. But if you have to watch this a few times, please do, because so many people don't realize that free will is staring them in the face. They just don't know they haven't understood what free will is. You might be thinking, well, what do you mean I have free will? Doesn't the mathematical law impose itself upon me? No. You are the mathematical law. That is what you are. You are a living system of mathematics. You are not something separate from that. It's not like there is you and then there is the living system of mathematics that imposes itself upon you. You are the living system of mathematics determining itself. You are a self-determining deterministic system. So you have internal agency. You are not constrained by external physical law. You are not constrained by anything external to you. And randomness does not play a factor because, as we saw, that violates free will and the principle of sufficient reason, no less. So this is the definition of free will. Now, it's important to note that there are many different factors at play here because we have a vast multiplicity of self-determining deterministic systems. So you have the holos, what we call this world of space and time, and that is a deterministic system, and it does influence you. Right? I'm not saying it doesn't influence you. It does. Of course it does. And of course chemical reactions will influence you. But the point is that it's providing you with data for you to then, as an internal agency, reflect upon and use your reason to make a choice. Reason is not a violation of free will. Reason is the very definition of free will. Because again, if you don't have reason, you have randomness. And randomness is clearly not free will. Your free will is your ability to rationally make a choice. And I hope, I am repeating myself a lot, and I hope that's not annoying. But the reason why I'm doing it is, again, I want to say it over and over and over again because I've talked about this before, and yet I still keep seeing people not understanding this. And they're looking for something else other than reason, but they don't understand that reason is what you are, and you're determining yourself. And when I say reason is what you are, mathematics is reason. You are a system of living mathematics that's determining itself. If that wasn't the case, it would be something other than you, or it would be randomness. Neither of these are free will. For you to choose yourself via your own mechanism, that is free will. You throw a random wrench in there, it's not free will anymore. That is what free will is. So now there's a few things to say about this. Again, you have many deterministic systems interacting with each other. You have many minds interacting with each other. You have the physical world. So there's a lot of things at play. Obviously, for example, if you are chained up in prison, that is going to impede your ability to actualize certain choices. So yeah, obviously, like in that case, you are constrained by physicality in that extreme case. But I think you know that. That should be obvious. What is important here is now this is going to have really important implications due to freedom and also ethics, which we're going to look at. But there's one thing that I want to note, just in case, there's some philosophers out there, is that some people, and if you don't care about this, we're going to talk about ethics and freedom in a minute. But I want to, for sake of completeness, some might argue that our position would fall into indeterminism/libertarianism. Now, why is that? Because when you go into indeterminism and libertarianism, there's a lot of different schools of thought. One of them says that there is a specific kind of libertarianism where there are free agents that exist with outside the deterministic world, and then these free agents themselves cause deterministic chains. So some may argue that monads are these free agents that cause these deterministic chains, but I wouldn't even call this indeterminism at this point. If those free agents are themselves governed by rational laws, and usually they are, we're not even talking about indeterminism anymore. It's been mislabeled. It's been mislabeled and misrepresented, and it's a poor position. It's a poorly defined position. So I just want to say that for sake of completeness, just in case there are some people out there, they love to go like, oh, you forgot to mention. I know, in my opinion, that's a shitty position because it's been misrepresented. We shouldn't call that indeterminism because it's not indeterministic. It's just not physical determinism. I see this a lot where a lot of people make this mistake, is that they say acausal as in not causal when they actually mean mental causation. So in Hyperionism, it's mental causation. We have mental causation, which is different from physical causation. Physical causation is where, there's just this one physical causal world and you are constrained by it. So just a quick note. The quick note is that if you're looking at determinism or compatibilism or indeterminism, where Hyperionism falls best is in compatibilism. Incompatibilism, not incompatibilism, incompatibilism. And that's just helpful, but always remember that, again, Hyperionism shatters definitions, it shatters boundaries. It's a completely new paradigm. So it doesn't really fit nicely in any of them. The closest one, yes, is absolutely the closest one, but it fits pretty well as compatibilism. But remember, if you get into an argument with someone and they're hung up on these little details, just remember to tell them, hey, don't get hung up on these definitions. Listen to what I'm telling you and how I'm defining it. This is how it is. You don't need to try and fit it in some kind of box. But if someone is really insistent on fitting it in a box, the box that it best fits in is compatibilism. But okay, let's continue now. Now, having understood the concept of free will, we want to look at ethics and freedom, because there is a very big ethical dilemma when someone takes the idea of hard determinism or the physicalist interpretation of a materialist reality that's deterministic. This brings up some very hard ethical questions. For example, let's say that there is a murder. Let's say there's a murderer. He takes a knife and stabs someone. Is that person morally responsible for that choice? If that person doesn't have free will, if everything was predetermined, if all of that was just because of mechanistic external causes and not because of their own internal volition or internal agency, are they responsible for the murder they committed? Is, a domino that gets knocked over by the previous domino responsible for falling over? Another way to look at it is, because everything is governed by these deterministic laws, because you might want to say, well, yeah, they're responsible. Well, think about it like this. What if that person who committed the murder, what if their hand was taped up to a knife and they were strapped to a machine that, kind of forced them to stab someone? Would they be responsible then? Well, you probably want to say no, right? Well, they were just subject to the external laws forced upon them. How is that different from the external influence of the laws of nature? Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit. There are differences, but you can see the argument there. It's a very, very big issue as far as ethical responsibility. If you take the stance of determinism, there's problems there. Now, in Hyperionism, is there any issue? Not at all. There is no issue, because the person who committed that crime wasn't doing so just because they were subject to external physical processes. They did so because they made the internal choice. It was their monadic mind that carried out those actions. Basically, it's carried out a morally reprehensible act. Now, one thing I want to make clear is that, some people might say, well, what about in Hyperionism? You say that morality doesn't exist. And real quick, let me just make a caveat, because again, there's trolls and whatnot that always want to point things out and say, oh, you contradict yourself. No, we deny moral absolutism. So there are good actions and bad actions, but it's changing. What that means is that in Hyperionism, we act according to what is best for the individuals and the collective. That's how we choose what should be done or should not be done. It's not some set of unchanging laws. We choose what should be done or should not be done according to what is best for individuals and the collective. So obviously, murdering someone is not good because it does not allow another mind to actualize and flourish. It's not good for the individual. It's not good for the collective. We don't want murder. So in the Hyperion system, that would absolutely be something that should not be done, and someone should be held responsible for it. And you see, that's perfectly compatible with internal agency and internal volition. If you take the hard deterministic position, you're going to have a really hard time explaining why someone should be responsible if they don't have free will, and they are even an illusion, that they don't even have a mind. So we can easily answer these ethical problems that physicality arises. Now, there's this other thing that I want to discuss that's very, very important. And this is the idea that we are free agents, each and every single one of us. Even being deterministic systems, we are self-determining. Always remember that. We are deterministic, but we're self-determining. Now, even so, we might say that there is conscious freedom and unconscious freedom. So this is what we talk about a lot in interstar actualization, and the idea with the shadow self is that there can be an immense amount of data within your unconscious, such as the shadow, where you are being controlled by your unconscious. So you may think that you're in control, but it's actually your unconscious that's in control. For example, you might start to become addicted because your shadow is causing you to drink every day because it's not getting released. It's not getting its proper outlet. And so, but even though you can see that is still you, even though you're governed, let's say, by your unconscious drives, that's still you. It's the unconscious you rather than the conscious you, but it's still you. So you still have free will. But we can even say and think of it as sort of like degrees of freedom, or conscious free will versus unconscious free will. Because the more conscious that you become, and that is the more that you make the unconscious conscious, the more freedom you accrue, the more freedom you attain, because you are then able to make conscious, informed decisions according to your rational faculty, rather than just being driven by unconscious urges. So there's a lot of things at play here. You have the physical world, you have other minds, you have societal conditioning, you have unconscious drives, and all of these things influence you. But the important difference is at the core of all that, there is you as that internal agency that ultimately has free will. Now, you have different degrees of free will, but you ultimately have free will. There are ways to become more free, we might say, by making your unconscious conscious, by trying to change society so that it doesn't impose certain limitations on you, etc. But at the heart of it, we are these self-determining deterministic systems. I believe it was, oh man, who was it? I'm drawing a blank here. Who wrote the Enchiridion? The Stoic philosopher that wrote the Enchiridion. I'm forgetting his name. Anyway, you know who it is. Anyway, this very intelligent Stoic philosopher who wrote the Enchiridion was a slave. And he eventually, he basically what he said, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, is that even though I'm in chains, I will always be free. Because he was able to, through his mind, be free. They could never say control, even being chained up and their body was chained, they were still free. Because they had that mental volition and mental agency and mindset. So, really good book, by the way. I recommend Epictetus. Yeah, okay. So I highly recommend it. Really good book. It's really short too. It's like, I don't know. It's very, very short. Anyway, you can see how, even though there might be impositions upon us by physical constraints, mental conditioning, interaction with other minds, we ultimately, at the core of it, are our own self-determining deterministic systems that can have the capability of gaining more and more and more and more and more exercise of our free will, exercise of our freedom. And we do this via metacognition. That's one way to do it. Metacognition is thinking about thought. We're thinking about thought right now. Most people don't do that. They just think. Most people just think. They don't think about thought. Us right now, what we're doing, this is thinking about thought. Metacognition is crucial to attaining higher degrees of consciousness, higher degrees of awareness. There's two important elements. There's more than two, but the two primary ones are metacognition and concept networking. Metacognition is generally dealing with developing a higher and higher sense of an analog I, and concept networking has to do with developing an analog all. We'll get into that. I've gotten into that before, but we'll talk about that some other time. But anyway, metacognition is the way to make the unconscious conscious and gain more degrees of freedom, because basically what it is that you are this deterministic system that's determining itself, because that's what you are. And when you engage in metacognition, which is thought thinking about itself, what are you doing? You are examining your own structure. So think of it a bit like this. You are, let's say that you're a computer code. And I don't like saying that because a computer code sounds so dead. You are living mathematics. You are alive. But it's the best analogy we have in the world. Imagine that you're sort of a computer code, and this computer code gains the capacity to become aware of itself as the code, and then begins to restructure its own code and program itself. So now you have the code that becomes its own programmer. I mean, in Hyperionism, we've always been our own programmer, but you know what I mean, in that we have now, through metacognition, thought thinking about itself, because we are doing that, we can now alter our structure. So do you see, even though we are a deterministic system, we are self-determining that also exist in this feedback loop where we have metacognition and self-referencing. Metacognition is self-reference, where we become aware of ourselves as that and then can alter ourselves so that we can make the best choices possible. So for example, one example is becoming aware of your shadow. That's metacognition. You are becoming more aware than the average person because you're thinking about thought. Specifically, now you are thinking about the unconscious, your own unconscious internal drives, which you can even think of sort of like an internal code or program that exists within you that no one else knows about, but you know about. And so that you can take it and deal with it and alter it so it works well with the rest of you. Because it's all you, but you can be conflicted or fragmented. Basically, what you're doing is you are engaging in metacognition and realizing that there are parts of yourself that are fragmented and altering your components or your structure so that this fragmentation becomes a unity. So that's why metacognition is incredibly important. And the more we engage in metacognition, the more conscious we become, the more developed your analog I becomes, the more conscious and aware you become as a monadic mind, and the more that you will develop your capacity to exercise your free will in the most optimal way possible. Now, there's another very important element to this, and this is Nietzsche's concept of the will to power. And unfortunately, we did not have enough time, I think, to get into Nietzsche's will to power, because that would take just as much time as we just took to explain. But the will to power is because we've defined free will. The will to power defines how free will operates. So we've defined what free will is, and we've seen that free will exists. So we know that free will exists, and we know what it is. The will to power is how it operates. And if you guys want, if you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. And then in another video, we will discuss the will to power, which will explain how free will operates. But do you see, even in that, that's another form of metacognition. Because when I say that's how free will operates, that means it's how you operate. And when you know how you operate, you can begin to change yourself. You can begin to perfect yourself. You can begin to become your own programmer rather than just being controlled by unconscious drives or being overly influenced by society, culture, religion, family, friends, social media, etc. It's an incredibly important component to metacognition and understanding how you operate. So I think that I have explained this enough, and hopefully I did. I know that I took a lot of time explaining it, but I wanted to explain it as precisely as possible, and hopefully I did. Even though I did, I still feel like some people are going to misunderstand. So please watch this video multiple times, take notes, think about it carefully, and remember that the critical thing to take away from this is that the reason why physical determinism says you don't have free will is it because it denies your internal agency. It's not the determinism that means you don't have free will, okay? I think that that's the part that trips people up. It's not the determinism aspect that means you don't have free will. It's the aspect that you are controlled by external determinism. That is the important thing to understand, because in Hyperionism, each and every single one of us is our own self-determining deterministic system, which means we have internal agency, we have internal will, internal volition, and this is the very definition of free will. And I get upset because, I mean, not really upset, but it's just frustrating because people don't understand. They're looking for free will. They don't understand free will staring them in the face. The ability for you to internally choose one choice over another choice due to your own rational faculty, your own weighing of options, that is what free will is. But they'll go, well, but I chose this one rather than that one. And isn't that a violation of free will? Because I didn't choose the other. I chose this one. I couldn't have chosen the other one. I chose this one. Yes, you could have chosen the other, but you didn't because you decided this one was better because of your rational faculty determined that there were specific reasons that meant that that would be the better choice for you. If you chose the other one for no reason at all, it would be randomness. And that is not free will. It's interesting that it's almost like people want randomness, but randomness is the opposite of free will. They don't understand that what they want is what they have and what is. But they haven't understood. You see why you have to understand what reality is when you know that what you are is that, because people don't know what they are. So they think that, well, isn't it the laws that made me choose that rather than this? Yes, but you are those laws. That's what you are. It's not an external thing that's imposing itself upon you. That's what you are. If you're not that, what are you? Tell me what you are if you're not that. That is what you are. So it's not an external imposition upon you, subjugating you to it. It is what you are, and you're doing what you will as that. So again, some people might be going, okay, I get it. It's obvious. I just repeat it very much because I see so many people get really, really tripped up by this concept. And I mean, if you don't want to call it free will, call it something else. But that's what it is. It's your ability to choose based on you, your reasons, your reflection. You decide, I want to do this. It makes the most sense to me. I've thought about it. I'm going to take this action. That's you. That's not some external, you may weigh external data. There may be certain things influencing you. If someone grabs your hand and forces you to do something, that's different as well. But you get what I'm saying, except for these extreme cases and obvious differences. You know, if certain chemical reactions are causing you to feel a certain way, then that's an issue as well. And if you have certain limitations, remember the physical body does play a part in it. It does. But ultimately, it's you as an eternal mind that has agency, even though there may be factors influencing and causing, because it all interacts with each other. You have different deterministic systems interacting with each other. But the more that you understand metacognition, the more that you upgrade your mind by self-reference and understanding what you are, the more free will you develop. And ultimately, we want to create a world where free will is maximized. So that we create, because, we live in a society that subjugates us to, there are certain choices that are not open to us. We may want to choose something, but we can't because, let's say, rich billionaires rule the world and money is not distributed correctly. And so many individuals live in, squalor. And so they would like to choose to, let's say, go to college, but they cannot. So that is a example of some sort of physical external condition limiting your free will. But you are still a free will agent. You are still a free agent. And we want to create a world that maximizes free will to the best, the best possible way that we can. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this made sense to you. I hope this cleared up some things about free will. And again, if it seems kind of fuzzy to you, don't feel bad. This is stuff that 99.9% of the population does not think about. Thinking about these sort of things will literally lead to you raising your consciousness, because you are making that, which normally people aren't aware of, become into awareness. You are changing basic awareness into, you are bringing things into self-awareness. People are not aware of their own internal mechanisms. So by you becoming aware of your internal mechanisms, you are literally raising your consciousness. This is not hyperbole. This is not some, new age mumbo jumbo, like, yeah, we're going to raise our consciousness. No, that's literally what you're doing. You're engaging in metacognition, which is self-reference, and you are accessing parts of yourself that the vast majority of people do not access, and you are becoming aware of it, and therefore you are being able to edit it and make choices based upon it. You are elevating your consciousness. That's what Hyperionism is all about. That's just one element, talking about free will. Hyperionism gives you the tools to maximize your ability of metacognition and concept networking to take your consciousness to hyper awareness, which is an incredibly high state of awareness that is beyond that really only handfuls of people throughout history have attained. So you understand the power of this. This is not just some new age mumbo jumbo, like, yeah, let's go out and do ayahuasca. We're going to raise our consciousness. Not to say that can't be a helpful tool as a stepping stone to use as information to then rationalize about, but it's not. What I'm letting you know is this is a very real process that you can utilize via tools such as metacognition, such as concept networking, to reach these higher and higher planes, and then we can build a new world according to it, where people aren't dying and killing each other and putting each other and capturing each other and raping each other, and we can live in a world where we are maximizing the freedom of the individual and the collective, so that we can all actualize, learn, grow, live, and thrive. So I hope you enjoyed this video, my friends. If you want to see a video on the will to power, which is how free will operates, let me know in the comments. If enough people do that, if enough people hit like, I'll do it. So let me know. I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who supports on Patreon, especially Cassidy, Alana, Renaissance Fairy, Jordy, and Michael. Thank you guys so much. If you want to support my work, consider supporting on Patreon. You'll get access to my lecture notes for tonight's video, as well as many of my other videos. You'll get access to our hidden Discord server, The Citadel, and access to our weekly secret live streams. Patreon is the best way to support my work because of all the deplatforming on Facebook, on YouTube, and all that. And you'll also get all that stuff if you support on the membership tier on YouTube, on tier 2 or higher. But Patreon is the best way. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.